So you probably know, admire, or at least have heard of Critical Role's game master, Matt Mercer. His ability to captivate an audience and his prowess as a game master and storyteller is known throughout the entire TTRPG community. But it's because of his prowess, as well as Critical Role's popularity, that many new players and game masters have begun to suffer from something many people have begun to refer to as the Mercer effect. The Mercer effect refers to that feeling that many players and game masters experience when they try to compare their experience with Critical Role's experience, or if a game master or player tries to match or exceed Critical Role's level of storytelling, role-playing ability, or just in general their polish. But as a game master and a player who has experienced both sides of the Mercer effect, both in front of and behind the game master screen, I want to share some of my experiences. But hello, my name is Nate Munn, and in this video we're going to be talking about the Mercer effect and how I have personally seen it begin to slowly kind of spread throughout the TTRPG community, if that makes sense. I hope that this video can be a good eye-opener to some of you who may be currently underneath the Mercer effect, or perhaps if it can be a good point of conversation either in the comments or at your home game sessions in regards to how the Mercer effect has affected your playstyle or your GMing style in regards to how you run your games, as well as some of the other points we're going to be talking about in this video. But without further ado, let's begin. The Mercer effect. It's real, and it's powerful. So Matt Mercer, the namesake of the Mercer effect, is a wonderful GM, and I truly see him as my inspiration for becoming a GM. But in recent years, or at least in my experience, I've noticed a lot of people in the TTRPG community, as well as game masters and players, begin to point out that he, as well as Critical Role, have begun to set such an incredible standard and set the bar so high in terms of what is to be expected from a D&D or a TTRPG game as a whole, in terms of the narrative, the voices that the GM does, as well as just the overall time and effort that is put into a game session. Matt Mercer and Critical Role's impact on the RPG community is undeniable, but it's essential to recognize that the Mercer effect can create unrealistic expectations for both new and experienced game masters. So Matt, and by extension Critical Role, perhaps the other way around, have had a profoundly positive effect on the entire TTRPG community, because they've exposed so many people to the fantastic hobby that is TTRPGs that many people probably wouldn't have known about or have tried unless it was for Critical Role and how much fun they seem to be having when playing the game, and in general the overall production quality that they have. But it's important to recognize that because of the massive influence that Critical Role has on the entire community, that the Mercer effect has had a chance to truly grow, and because of this, it can set unrealistic expectations for both new players and game masters alike. And before I gain the ire of some fellow critters who are perhaps watching this video right now, please hear me out first. So let's talk about the pressure that is put on new GMs, either by themselves or perhaps the group that they're running for, because that group is a big fan of Critical Role. For new GMs, the Mercer effect can be both motivating and intimidating. In recent years, Critical Role has introduced a ton of people to D&D, and by extension, the TTRPG community as a whole, especially now that they're producing shows that don't use D&D as the core system. And it's because of this that many people have begun picking up the game either as a player because it looks super fun, or perhaps as a game master because they are inspired by Matt's performance and expertise. And honestly, who can blame them? Because it looks super fun and it is super fun, or at least in my biased, humble opinion. The pressure that game masters either put on themselves or the players put on the game master to replicate Matt's level of mastery or Critical Role's level of production value can lead to a lot of burnout, self-doubt, and can even lead to the discouragement to begin or continue being a game master. To some people, seeing Matt get behind the GM screen, roleplay a couple of characters, maybe roll some dice, and fight your players as a couple of monsters can seem pretty simple. That is until they try it for themselves. And especially for new players and game masters, when they try to achieve the same level of polish that Critical Role has in terms of the entire cast's role-playing ability and Matt's prowess as a dungeon master, if they don't feel like they achieve that same polish, then they may feel like they're not playing the game correctly. And for newer players who are big fans of Critical Role especially, or at least in my experience, they can sometimes dive headfirst into the action without having any D&D or TTRPG experience in general, and expect that every D&D or TTRPG experience and every game session and every table is going to be exactly like Critical Role's, because why wouldn't it, right? When in reality, it's most likely not going to be. But this effect, or condition perhaps, doesn't only apply to new players and game masters who are trying to replicate or capture a portion of that beautiful thing that Critical Role has. Experienced game masters and players can also fall victim to the Mercer effect. Sometimes experienced game masters who really want to give their players a great experience can find themselves falling under the Mercer effect because, as of now, many people consider Critical Role to be the perfect model game for playing D&D and perhaps even TTRPG role-playing as a whole. And it's because of this, understandably, that a lot of game masters want to achieve that same level of quality for their own game sessions. But of course, not everyone may think this, but many people do still think that Matt's skill as a game master is something that all GMs should try and achieve, and many game masters might find themselves voluntarily or involuntarily trying to mimic. For experienced GMs, the constant comparison of their games to Critical Roles by themselves or their players might stifle their own creativity because they're trying to copy another game master's style. Trying to mimic Matt's style might end up restricting your own ability to explore new techniques, take risks with diverging from the proven Mercer formula, and innovate your own storytelling by just trying something new. Embracing individuality and trying to craft your own style is what makes your game special, not trying to mimic another game master's style. Sure, splicing in a little bit of Mercer DNA to your own GMing style is perfectly fine, but it's when you begin to do that constantly and begin to constantly compare your own games to Matt's games that it can lead to a lot of comparison and in general can lead to a lot of unnecessary headache. And as I've kind of mentioned throughout this video so far, the Mercer effect does not only apply to game masters but also applies to players. Because players who are fans of Critical Role might come to the table with expectations influenced by the cast of Critical Role's performances. Which again is very understandable because they do such a fantastic job of keeping things entertaining but also very fun to watch. But the point I'm trying to make is that when a player who is a big fan of Critical Role shows up at a table and they have expectations for how the game master should act or roleplay, or how the players should act and roleplay, it can lead to a lot of bad situations, one of which I'm about to share with you. So, I'm a professional game master who runs a lot of D&D and Pathfinder games for new players, and a lot of the time, they're completely new to tabletop role-playing games. And generally, I like to have a small portion of my session zeros dedicated to going over player and GM expectations, so that way we all know what to expect from one another when it comes to playing and role-playing in our game sessions. But it was during one of my D&D games, and specifically one of my session zeros, that a player expressly stated that they wanted to have an experience like Critical Roles. So for some of you experienced game masters out there, that might have been a red flag to you. But anyway, since I've experienced this before, I was sure to explain to the player that I am not Matt Mercer and my games are not Critical Role, but I will still try to give them as good of an experience that I can possibly muster. And with that, the player ended up having a good time throughout the campaign, at least as far as I know. But there were moments when that player was in the zone and role-playing their character beautifully, but the other players who were also new weren't quite as comfortable role-playing their characters as much as the other player. Because of this, there were a couple of times throughout the campaign when this player was very disappointed because they wanted to have a similar experience to the dramatic scenes that they saw on Critical Role, but realized that not every D&D player is going to roleplay the same amount or to the same level as Critical Role's team does. But I wanted to share this situation because I wanted to show the player's side of the Mercer effect, because when a player shows up to a game session really wanting to roleplay and have an experience like Critical Roles in terms of the dramatic scenes and the voice acting and all that stuff, and especially when they're with players who they don't know, it can lead to a lot of disappointment when you're holding the GM and the other players to the expectations or to the same level as these professional voice actors that are on the cast of Critical Role. And while I, for one, love role-playing NPCs and doing different voices for my characters and things like that, not every player likes to do that and can feel very uncomfortable when other players or the game master forces them to do that to try to achieve some expectation that one of your players or perhaps the GM has in regards to comparing your sessions and your players to Critical Roles. So as you can kind of tell, the Mercer effect is a two-way street. And having all of these expectations puts a lot of pressure not only on the players, but also the game master. And it can be challenging for GMs or players who aren't comfortable doing dramatic voice acting for their NPCs or their player characters. But like what I just mentioned, what I like to do during my session zeros is express to my players what I do in regards to role-playing NPCs and doing voices as well as my GMing style. That way they know what to expect from me, and then I open the floor up to them to share their expectations for their fellow players as well as me as the game master, and they can also share their particular playstyle, whether it be they really like to roleplay their characters, or if they're only really there for combat and all that other kind of stuff, and can really clear the air in regards to what everyone has in terms of expectations. Plus, during this time, it's a great way to throw out disclaimers in terms of what are everyone's triggers, as well as for you as the game master to express, hey, just in case anyone wasn't sure, I'm not Matt Mercer, and this is not Critical Role. And speaking of Session Zeros, if you guys would be interested in seeing a video about that, let me know. But anyways, don't feel like you have to follow Matt's jamming style, or you have to learn from him. Embrace your own style. Breaking free from the Mercer effect means acknowledging that not every game master has to be a mirror image of Matt Mercer. Every game master has their own strengths, whether it be world building, improvisation, fostering player agency, or role-playing. So play to yours. Celebrate your own achievements and growth as a game master, no matter how different they might be from Matt's. And if you're a player, don't feel like you have to roleplay your character like a professional voice actor in order to fulfill one of the other player's expectations. Just play the game and your own character how you want to and have fun. While it's important to make sure that the Mercer effect does not overshadow your own achievements and your own playstyle, there is still a lot that can be learned from Matt's techniques and his GMing style. By studying his storytelling techniques, character interactions, and pacing, you can incorporate valuable lessons into your own games that can be incredibly valuable to you as a game master and can really help you improve. But it's important to remember, learning from Matt is about adapting and integrating, not imitating. And this rule really applies to any game master who you may be watching or trying to learn from. It doesn't have to be Matt Mercer of all people. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because I myself am a product of the Mercer effect and have gone through a lot of hardships in my jamming career and player career with comparing my game sessions to Matt's sessions specifically. Because back in 2014 and 2015, when I was first starting out being a player or a game master officially, and I wanted to learn how to be a better one, I looked up videos and found Geek and Sundry, where I found Critical Role. I was that new game master who tried to be like Matt Mercer, and I was also that new player who tried to roleplay to the same extent as the cast members of Critical Role. And as I'm sure some of my close friends who were my first players can attest to, my first campaigns were terrible and kind of all over the place because I was trying to create super elaborate role-playing heavy campaigns like Critical Roles when my players just wanted to run around in the fantasy world, get up to shenanigans, and be badasses. Meanwhile, me as the game master, I was caught in this paradox of comparison by comparing my own game sessions and my players to the players and game sessions of Critical Roles, which was not fair to myself or my players. But from a lot of trial and error from me trying to create a Matt Mercer level of game, I discovered my own GMing style. So we should celebrate Matt Mercer's contributions to the TTRPG community, while also acknowledging that the Mercer effect, while powerful, is something that we can navigate. New game masters, experienced storytellers, and experienced players. You all have your own stories to tell and unique skills to bring to the table and to bring your story to life. Embrace your journey, have fun with each other, and remember that your style is what makes your games memorable. Do you as the game master really want your sessions or your campaigns to be remembered as a Critical Role clone? Or if you're a player, do you really want all of your sessions to be filled with nothing but you comparing your current game session and your current campaign that you're in to Critical Role's professionally produced and ran game sessions? Well, I would hope not, because after all, comparison is the thief of joy. And while many people see the Mercer effect as a negative thing with all of the effects I just covered in this video, I kind of want to change how people see it. While many people see the Mercer effect as a disease of comparison, why can't the Mercer effect be the desire to just achieve what Critical Role has achieved? Not in terms of role-playing, the storyline, the characters, or the GMing style, but in terms of how it started and what it currently is to this day. Critical Role started as a group of friends who happened to also be nerdy-ass voice actors who gathered once a week to play Dungeons and Dragons. Well, originally it was actually Pathfinder, but that's besides the point. Why can't the Mercer effect, instead of being this negative effect with a negative connotation in the TTRPG community, be the positive desire to gather once a week, group up around a table, whether it be virtual or physical, have some fun rolling dice, and getting up to shenanigans with your friends in a world of your game master's creation? But those are just my thoughts on the matter. What do you guys think? But anyways, if you found this video interesting or helpful, then feel free to leave a like, ring the notification bell, or share it. And as always, feel free to leave a comment down below in regards to some of the things I talked about in this video, or how the Mercer effect may have affected you specifically, or someone you know. It's always really interesting to read your guys' comments. But as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be sure to catch you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.